Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. You're on YouTube, that you can watch on YouTube. The show is organized in order for people who watch and listen to it to ask questions about chess and the chess world of a master. I'm an international master. You can send these questions in advance, and that's probably the best way because then you can really think about the question and you can send a game, for example, with it. And that's or game or positions or whatever you're interested in. And the way to do that is by email. And that email is askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's kind of a long address, so I'll spell it out for you. ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. That's CHESSCLUB.com. And I'll repeat that again later at the end of the show so you can get that. But basically, ask imwatson@chessclub.com. Now, another way to ask a question is right now on the chat. Usually we have people on the chat, but this is a very strange week because, for one thing, I missed a week. But more importantly, we're at a strange time right now. We're 2 hours earlier than we usually are, so I don't expect as many people to be on the chat as usual because it tends to be the same people, and they may not have gotten the word or they may not be able to schedule coming on. But for those of you listening, anybody who wants to, whether you know much about chess or not, can throw in a question onto the chat screen on your right, and I'll be looking at that periodically and answering questions. Now, as far as what the questions are, there's plenty of topics. We can cover pretty much any topic, but I was going to say that here are a few that we usually tend to cover. The most popular is about, well, is openings. People ask about chess openings all the time. And I have a fair amount of expertise about that, having written a lot of opening books and been a teacher and been a player, of course. So players also like to ask what I think about certain games, and they often send me their own games. Sometimes it's about another game played by grandmasters, but often they send me their own games. Now, if you're going to send your own game, you should do that by email. It's not going to fit under the chat too well. Hello, I see somebody on the chat. Very good. Hi. And I've also asked, I also get asked about chess history, chess books and videos. I know a lot about books as an author. So like which books are good for which openings or which strategy or for which kind of improvement. Chess improvement is a fairly common topic. Just how do I improve and what do I know about questions about chess strategy, chess history, of course. And anyway, I sometimes get questions about leading players. You know, the Sinkfield Cup is going on right now in St. Louis. And there's it's being shown on ICC, and the game of the day, the best games and best excerpts are being shown on ICC. And I think this afternoon, it's in about 2 hours, you'll get the game of the day broadcast with Grandmaster John Spielman. Tomorrow, I'm going to do the game of the day, so at roughly the same time, roughly 6 p.m. ICC time. So that's something to look forward to and something to check out this afternoon. And let's just get started then. I think that about covers it. I have a question. Let me see. Okay, let me say one other thing. I didn't copy the chat from 2 weeks ago. It's been 2 weeks, so that's a little strange. But so feel free to repeat any questions that we didn't get to a couple weeks ago. And I've got a game to show you that I was sent by one of the people, so you can enjoy that. Udabev asks 1e4, e5 for black, please. Yeah, could you explain what that question is exactly? What about 1e4, e5? He's talking about these moves, the most common opening in chess for many years. Coming a big revival right now. All of a sudden, 1e4, e5 is being played at the top levels for the last, say, 2 years. And for example, in this tournament, this Sinkfield Cup, there's just a whole bunch of 1e4, e5 games. So it's kind of funny. Chess has come full circle. Hello, Jimmy V. Richmond. How are you doing? I can't say too much about it. It's a classical opening. It was played overwhelmingly in the 19th century and most of the 20th century until the Sicilian sort of took over. So it became the second most popular opening. This is the Sicilian defense. This became the most popular opening in chess. In fact, almost a quarter of all chess games played, period, overall, were Sicilian defenses for a while. And just recently, this, especially in the top levels, you're just seeing a ton of these. There's a whole bunch of books on this right now. Bolgan has written these videos. I think Gustafsson has some. There's just a whole bunch of E4, E5 books that have been coming out. One of the big differences recently with E4, E5. How should I play against the Knight C3 Roy Lopez? The Knight C3 Roy Lopez. Well, that could be. Here's the Roy Lopez, everybody. Let me see if I can get this question down. I may not get this right. Now, traditionally, Black has played this move A6. The Berlin defense goes like this, so that's been very common. And almost always these days, people are declining, not letting Black play the main line, which is, at least the top players aren't letting this happen, which is this. This goes to an endgame. These moves are a little mysterious if you haven't seen them before, but are pretty much the main natural moves, and were played for just decades and decades until it turned out that Black was doing very well, not very well in this endgame, but he's able to draw this endgame. This endgame is a classic case of having two bishops. A bishop pair is a big advantage. Sometimes it's worth almost a pawn. But Black, having given up certain weaknesses, he captured away from the center and has doubled pawns. Also, White has a little bit of space with that extra pawn and a little lead in development. It's White's move, and he's really got two pieces out already, and Black only has one. But the bishops are quite strong, and the pawn structure is really very solid for Black. So this has drawn many, many games. So what we're seeing more now is the move D3. This is what people are playing. Whoops, one more move here. This structure has become extraordinarily popular. It also comes up in the Joko piano with this move. And whether Black plays knight f6, d3, or bishop c5, d3, this has become extremely popular and is very related to the Ruy Lopez. It tends to be very similar games tend to occur in these two openings. Anyway, he says something about knight c3, so maybe he's referring to this move. I'm not sure, which is not a really, really common move, but now we're in a four knights game. So maybe that's the knight c3 that he's talking about. And this is actually the same thing as a four knights game. Try and remember that position. It's actually the same thing as this, the old traditional four knights game, which, by the way, is a very interesting opening that might get revived a little bit. It's been played a little bit recently, and I think it's an interesting option for White. It can give some very interesting complications. This is called the four knights game. Black can either imitate like that or play very dynamically with Rubinstein's move, knight d4, which I think is still pretty sound. It can be a gambit. It can turn into a gambit. But a lot of times Black will just keep developing. For example, if White plays here, Black will play here and offer this pawn. And sometimes White will take that pawn. And Black will castle and play for the moves rook e8 and d5, attacking in the center. White will usually bring his knight back here. And anyway, that's knight c3 in the Ruy Lopez. You don't see knight c3 that much in the Ruy Lopez, though. I don't know if that's what you meant. You might want to say thank you for saying for clarifying, but just not sure about knight c3. That's not such a typical Ruy Lopez move. c3 is very common. Maybe you meant that. So, for example, after there and here and all these normal moves, very often Black will play for the move. White will play c3. For example, move a position like this. c3 is the main traditional move. So that could be what's going on. And there are literally hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of games in the databases from this position. And you can start checking out those games. And you can always ask me something more specific. Thank you for the question. The Petrov is out. You mean the Petrov book? What do you mean, Jimmy V. Richmond? It's out, or it's sometimes we say something's out when we're saying it's out of consideration, we can't play it. But I suspect you mean the book. Is that correct? Because there is a big book that I think someone, maybe you mentioned a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember who it's by. But the Petrov is this. I'll get to the games, by the way, really soon. The games that I've been sent, we'll get right to that. But first, he's mentioning this. That's called the Petrov defense. We've talked about it a fair amount on this show. And I guess there's a big new book out. I can't remember who that's by. Maybe Jimmy, you can tell me that. There's a delay here, so I can't see your answer quite yet. There's a 30-second delay, so I'll have to wait for you to say something about that. Okay. In the meantime, given no other questions, let me show you a game. I can get to a couple games. I haven't been showing enough games. People always send me games, and I show a few of them, but probably not enough. Here's a game sent to me by Ears, who is a big regular on this show. He sent me quite a few games, and I haven't really shown enough of them. He says, I had another open Catalan as black. He plays the black side of the Catalan. I did some very good stuff remembering positions from previous study, and he did. You'll see this in this game. Then I did the usual piece drop when I got tired. Missed a lot of interesting stuff along the way. Okay, let's look at this game. I think I have some notes on this game. Okay, so here's how the game went. The Russian defense. There we go. Everybody played in the 80th, 90th. Maybe the 80s and 90s, you meant. That there was a lot of Petrov. It's out of favor, you meant. Okay. Jimmy Richmond is saying that the Petrov defense is out of favor. That's probably true, but there's like maybe just the last year, I think there have been a few more top-level Russian defense games. In the 80s and 90s, what made it popular was Vladimir Kramnik played it and seemed to draw every single game as black and maybe even win a few, and so it got extremely popular. Today, the knight c3 move is popular in the Petrov. Yes, it is. It's very popular. He's talking about, that's a good point, he's talking about this line. And every time we bring up the Petrov on this show, I mention that I think that this move here, this move c4, I think is really a fun move, and I still think white can get small advantages with this move, but nobody ever seems convinced of that. The move he's talking about wasn't even played much for many, many years. This was played almost automatically, all the time, just played constantly. But about maybe about 10 years ago, maybe they started playing this, maybe 8 years ago, people started playing this knight c3 move. And it attacks the knight, so black almost always just takes this, so he doesn't lose any time. White takes here, and the idea of the opening is that these pawns really aren't that bad. They're like in the Ruy Lopez, actually. And that the pieces now are coming out very smoothly. The bishops are coming out very quickly. White can play queen up and castle and put rooks on 2 open files in the middle of the board. From black's point of view, he's not even behind in development after a move like that. And he has no weaknesses at all. Very solid position. So black thinks, well, I have nothing to fear. We've had some questions about this before, and we looked at some games, and we looked at some lines where black actually castled queenside. At first, black was always castling kingside, but a lot of times he'd get attacked with this move g4. Let me see if I can make some moves. I guess bishop e3 is the main move, and black plays knight c6 a lot of times, and sometimes white plays bishop f4. But anyway, some positions like this can happen. And white started attacking on the king side with the pawns and maybe got some advantages. I'm not sure if that's exactly why black started castling queenside, but black now often castles queenside in these positions. Plays maybe a move like this. And we talked about this pawn grab idea, about just grabbing that pawn, but much more likely is just to go here. White makes some sort of move and black castles queenside. It's fascinating stuff, and I think the Petrov has... It's had just a small revival in the last year or two. My screen is freezing here. I hope yours isn't, so I'm going to revive that. There we go. Okay, is it possible to play the Sicilian as white with the bishop b2 fianchetto? Okay, yes it is, and let me come back to that. Let me show you this game first, because I want to get to a lot of the questions that were sent me by email. They should get a little bit of priority. Somebody sent me a game. Ears sent me this game, and this is this Catalan system he was talking about. Now the Catalan is a kind of Queen's Gambit. That's the Queen's Gambit. When you have this pawn against that pawn and white plays c4, that's called the Queen's Gambit. If black plays e6, it's the Queen's Gambit declined because he doesn't take the pawn. And white often then brings out one of the 2 knights, like that, and then black brings out his knight, and that's what's happened here. Now, if white has brought out this knight f3 instead of knight c3, he has an extra option here, which has become the most popular Queen's Gambit in chess pretty much, which is called the Catalan system. My friend John Donaldson, the international master, played the Catalan system for 30 years before and wrote books about it before it became incredibly popular. But anyway, this is called the Catalan system. White is just going to play here, put pressure on the center, castle kingside. And one good thing about the Catalan is very safe. Black doesn't get really any attacking chances. So sorry about that arrow there. It's not a very good arrow, is it? The arrow was supposed to be this way, attacking the center with this bishop here. Okay, so in this game, black just takes, which is the most common reply either after bishop e7 or sometimes black waits to take on d takes c4, but it is a very common idea. And then black counterattacks in the center, which is a system that I think is really interesting and has been maybe a little bit underrated. There is one problem with it though, and that's what came up in this game, which is that black in the old days used to play these lines like, I'm sorry, white in the old days used to play lines such as, and let me see if I can show this to you here. Knight e5 was a major move that was played a lot. And the idea is that if, sorry, wait, queen a4, sorry. I'm thinking about queen a4 as being a big line. That's been played a lot. And then black might take this, and then white will take. Now black's a pawn ahead, but white has 3 pieces on that square, and the knight is pinned. Anyway, this kind of position was played for a long time and discussed for a long time. And this position has been played for a long time. And white plays check, and black can't take back because there's a fork winning the rook, but he can just play here. So that's one of the old main lines. Well, recently, over the last couple of years, white's been playing this move d takes c5, which looks kind of boring because the queens are going to come off. But white's planning to get just one little tiny minor advantage by taking the queens. Now black can take this first, but of course that brings a rook into play. So in this game, black plays bishop takes c5 and lets white take. And what that does is it forces black to either keep his king in the center, which is dangerous because this bishop can come out here, rooks can come to the center. White has enough pieces left that black having his king in the center can be just a little bit risky, even though the queens are out. Or take here, but that's an undeveloping move. That's sort of a backward move, and the knight isn't very well placed on d8. So white played knight here, trying to attack here, and that's the standard move. And black played a move that a lot of people have played, and I might have even thought was a good move for a while, but I don't think it's that good a move. I'm not thrilled with this move anymore because what happens is, okay, here's black's reasoning. Black's reasoning is, I'm behind in development, but the one good thing I have going on here is that after I play here, white's going to have an isolated pawn here and an isolated pawn here, and this isolated pawn, the one on c3, is on an open file, so it can be attacked. And so black's thinking, okay, I lost a move with my pawn, getting rid of my pawn. I gave white an extra move, but on the other hand, white's extra move gave him weaknesses. Just for the record, I now think that probably you shouldn't play this. I think a really interesting move here is to play here. A very interesting move because it looks terrible walking right into that long diagonal, but it's getting the bishop out somewhere. It's getting the bishop out quickly, and that's what black needs is development really more than he does this pawn structure change. And if white plays a move like knight here, which is certainly normal, black simply opposes it. And this is not a bad position at all. For example, if white takes, now white's got to get his pawn back pretty soon because he is a pawn behind, and he takes, well, black can just play over here and come to the file pretty quickly. Now he might bring the king up to e7, bring the other rook over, and this knight can go to d6 at some point, and this is basically equal. There's no real problems in this position. So that's what I would recommend doing now instead of the c3 move. He doesn't have to play knight e5. He could also play, let me see, knight takes c4. This has been played actually. And this time you get an extra tempo by attack. You're getting your pieces out quickly by attacking that knight. That's the idea. And if white plays something like a pawn move here, black gets out of the way of that long diagonal attack and gets a rook on an open file and feels perfectly happy is what it amounts to. And white has to be a little careful. If white plays a move like this, maybe black decides, okay, I'll give white the 2 bishops, which is usually very dangerous. A bishop pair is a dangerous thing to give your opponent, but this is quite a weak pawn, and the square in front of it is well blockaded. A knight can end up going here, a bishop can go there, a rook can go there. White will never get rid of that weakness, and he might lose it too. So the idea is this is a fairly equal position. Why isn't it just better for black? Well, because the bishop pairs are notoriously dangerous in the endgame. So it's about an even position. So what white has done instead of b3 is just play this move. I'm sorry, knight f5, I think. Yeah. And then black's played here, and we already talked about this kind of position, this position here with rook c8. And I think that's quite a playable position for black. It's fine. white might still try to play. Either side can play this position. It looks simplified, but it's kind of fun. You can have a lot of fun in positions like this. Both sides have chances to win a position like this, which is what chess should be all about. All right, now having said all that, let's see what happened in this game. What happened with c3. And the problem is this opens up the b file, which doesn't sound too important, but ends up being fairly important. And it also gives a stronger outpost for a knight on this square. This pawn actually supports the center. So maybe black certainly has a playable position, but it's maybe not ideal. The other thing is if you play b6 now, which you'd like to play, you're going to run to a4, a5. And that might be worth a little something for white because it goes very well with the pawn being here. Okay, so let's just see what happens here. He castles, certainly natural move. Rook here. Now here's a case where he could have played the natural move knight e5, which I think we have talked about in similar positions in the past, with direct pressure here. And then for sure there's not going to be any sort of b6. There's also not going to be a knight c6 because you've got 2 pieces on that square. Let me check the chat for a second. Thanks for the c4 idea. Okay, thank you. I'll get back to that Sicilian with bishop b2 with b3. Hello, Watson. I've recently discovered this stream. I have 2 questions. g3 against the timing off. I will get back to that. Thank you. First, I'm going to show a couple games. I'm going to show things that people sent me by email. So hold that thought. I'll scroll back up and look at that later. So knight e5 was a good move. Instead of that, white played rook b1. Not a bad move at all. And black managed to at least stop knight e5. That's nice. The only problem is white can get knight d4 in, which is also a fairly aggressive move. Black played back. Now it's possible black should play the other way. It's always a difficult decision. He could go back that way, very solid. And white plays this move now. This is actually pretty interesting. Whoops, sorry. Let's go forward. That move, opening up his bishop and attacking the c6 square. So that's an interesting move. And black probably should play this move. Even though it wastes time and it doesn't develop a piece, it gets the knight on a very strong square. Instead, black played here. Very logical move, protecting the c6 square. And white should probably play here and sneak his knight into that square. That would be a strong move. These are just technical points, though. Both sides are playing this very well, actually. Black developed that, and white played there, hitting that weak square there and maybe that square too. It's a very nice bishop. White's bishops have a lot of scope here. Okay, black goes back. That's actually a nice idea because it kind of opens up that line, and the bishop is still performing a good defensive purpose. Okay, white just puts a pawn up. Don't know whether that's good or bad. Black centralizes the knight, and it's a pretty good move, I guess, if white has to go off the file to protect that pawn. That implies knight d5 worked pretty well. And that move turns out not to be very good. White should just go ahead and attack in the center and drive the knight back, and then bring this knight into that weak square. And white has some initiative here. That's one reason I don't want you to play this c3 move next time. I don't think it works very well. It's been played by a lot of good players, by the way, but I think now they're going to be giving it up, actually, because white's just getting too much play. I think you should look at that b6 move, because this kind of position is very easy for white to play and hard for black to defend. It's not like black's lost, but it's just no fun. Anyway, white played h4 instead. Get back to that point. Yeah, there it is. And that move turns out to be pretty bad because now that move would be excellent going into this square and also this square. But black played here. Not sure about that move. I don't really like the looks of that move because it straightens out white's pawns and opens this file. So maybe that's your first actual mistake, Ears, if you're listening. Ears is regular on this show and a very strong player. He sent me some good games. Okay, so black tries to cover the outpost. That seems so logical. It's very hard to argue with that move. And white does a very good thing here. White plays a good game generally in this game, but white's going to come to better squares with that knight. The knight here is restricted. It's an instructive point. This knight looks strong, but it can't go to d4, it can't go to c5, and it can't go to a5. So it's really not a very good piece right now. So what white does is he reroutes it to a better square. Maybe he's looking at going there or going there. Even coming around to knight f3 is a pretty good idea too. That's good. It's well placed there. So black plays here, and I'll just zoom through these moves. I don't want to take the whole show on this one game. White attacks. Black attacks the bishop and tries to get active. Now black's attacking that rook. The problem is white's bishops are quite strong here. Now black comes back, good idea, attacking here. Maybe the knight can centralize. Black's doing a very good defensive job. It's just that white stands better anyway. Good move now would have been bishop e7 because the rook would be misplaced for black here, and this would be loose in a lot of lines. Once again, we've got the idea of playing knight here and knight in, and also maybe the idea of just taking that knight. So he didn't do that. He played here, and black could always play this knight d6 move here. That's probably the best move because it stops. In fact, h5 actually is probably quite a mistake because it allows that knight to come to one of these big squares. After h5, white is able to play knight e4, which is a problem because of that big square sitting there, and so white's quite a bit better here. And here's where black makes the mistake that he referred to in his question, which is that move. Probably in some time trouble. I don't know how fast this game was, but that turns out to be a blunder. Does everybody see why? Because white played here and here and here and got two pieces for a rook and retains the two bishops. And I would show the rest of the game, but I think it's better to get to some other games that people sent me and other questions that people sent me and also the questions on the chat. So I'll just tell you that white won this game and should win this game. This is a killing position because not only two pieces for a rook, but also the two bishops are very active too. White even has two center pawns to one, which is another advantage. The central majority we've talked about, two center pawns to one. Okay, let me go back. Is it possible to play the Sicilian as white with the bishop b2 Fianchetto? Yeah, I think somebody used to call this something like the Snyder system or something. Robert Snyder, who wrote some book for kids, wrote a little book about this variation. It's definitely reasonable. I've had people play it against me before when I've played the Sicilian. Why isn't it played more? I think it's because it doesn't challenge the center enough. Black has too many good ways to play against it, even though black can't get an advantage against it. Because after all, white can get away. You know, white's white. White has an extra tempo anyway, and there's nothing illogical about putting your bishop on the long diagonal. So, so yeah, you can look into playing this line. It's I don't know why more people don't play this. I came up with a system against it where you play this move. The idea is that you can't play bishop b2 because you're losing this pawn, but you don't really necessarily want to play e5 because then when you do put your bishop here, it doesn't have any scope, right? Now, actually, this is still an equal position, fully playable for both sides, but at least white had to make sort of a concession. And you might say, well, why don't you just defend this? Well, if you play there, that's maybe not consistent with what you wanted to do with the bishop there. It blocks off your own bishop. Not that it's a bad move, but it's a possibility that white isn't really trying to do that. And this move makes all these little holes on dark squares and is also kind of passive and blocks off your own bishop. So this knight f6 is one idea. Another idea is to play the same sort of thing like this. And then after white plays there, play here. And white has to decide what to do with that pawn. Again, this is an even game. I'm not claiming black has an advantage. I just think it's very easy for black to play this. He has to do something about that pawn. That blocks off his own pieces and makes some weaknesses that you probably don't want to deal with. So probably white's going to play knight c3. And then black could play a normal Sicilian kind of move like this, for example. This is like a regular Sicilian defense. And black can always just develop normally like this. e6, bishop e7, castles. White can develop normally also. White can play... now here you want to decide what your setup is. Maybe white wants to go back to an open position with d4. And just for example, let me see if I can show you how that might work. Maybe e6, d4, captures, maybe knight f6. And this is a particular kind of Sicilian where I wouldn't say either side is better. It's not so good to get this out this early in the Sicilian. On the other hand, black's kind of done some strange things too. So my experience is these positions are fairly even. If white just develops, there's this problem that black can gain a tempo with bishop c5 and get his pieces out very smoothly. Okay, that's not a full answer, but at least there's something there. Okay, Ubdov asks, how should I play against the g3 line in the Taimanov? That's a very good question. That's actually such a heavy, long theoretical question to ask that we might have to get a little more specific. You might want to send me an email asking about a specific line. Now, that's the Sicilian defense. This is called the Taimanov variation, when you play knight c6 followed by queen c7, or maybe followed by a6. And white can play the g3 line he's referring to as knight c3 first, and the original Taimanov is with queen c7. Now there is a kind of time on-off where you play a6, which Taimanov himself played once or twice. But what's mainly called the time on-off variation is this. And against either one of those moves, you can play g3. Now one advantage to a6, I'll just show you, this is kind of obscure, but one thing you can play if you play a6 first is that after g3, you don't have to play queen c7. You can play, and let me see if I can show you this. You can play this move, d6, and then cover the c6 square before white has a chance to win a pawn there or double your pawns. And then you get this basic kind of position, which is considered just fine for black. You know, if white plays here, black plays there, and black castles. And this is just an interesting Sicilian, and it's fun to play. It's a Scheveningen pawn structure. I can see that the delay in this broadcast is really, really long. So if you've asked a question and I haven't responded to it, it's partly because we have almost a 2-minute delay, it looks like. So just remember, when I'm reading something on the chat, it's 2 minutes later. So, and let me show you the difference between this position, which is considered completely solid for black, and a regular time on-off with g3, where we have to figure out maybe something else to do. And let me show you why that is. If you play a regular time on-off and white plays here and black plays here now, which he usually does because pretty soon knight b5 is a problem. Whoops. White plays here, black plays here. Let's say black does the same thing I just mentioned and plays this move. Here's something very interesting. White can play this move, and if black plays a move like this, white has a nice little trick, which is to play captures, captures, and then e5. And I think white has a very small advantage here, but it's a good advantage, and I used to play this as white, actually. Black probably going to take that because he doesn't want to move his knight. And white takes that, and you might say, well, is he losing a rook? Well, no, he's not losing a rook. He's actually winning a pawn because he plays check, and then he takes the rook. So black can't really play that way. But what can black? Now black's got some weaknesses, though. And if black, for example, just maybe, I don't know, castles or something, threatening queen takes, then you have this move bishop here. Threatening rook takes pawn, winning the queen. If the queen moves too far away, you're on this piece. Look at these bishops raking down here. And you might say, hey, wait a minute, that's a simple answer to that move. But the problem with that answer is now white can play rook takes e6. If black takes back, you win. You're going to be a pawn up once you take this. You're going to be pawn up with the better pawn structure. It's a nice little trick. And if bishop takes bishop, then you have rook takes c6. You may have other good moves too, but that's one way to play. Now you're 2 pawns up, at least temporarily. And you've got an indirect attack on that rook too. So this is looking like a very, very good position. In other words, let's say he goes here or something, you might even throw in a move like that. And if he takes that, then you can throw in this, and then you can take here and be very happy because you're 2 pawns ahead. I think 2 pawns, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's maybe a quick answer. But how to avoid that line as black, and I'll try to do this real quickly. How's our time doing here? That's not that bad. Okay, let me finish the answer. So against this order, if you don't play a6 first, I don't really like playing this structure with knight f6 and g3, and you need another answer. The traditional answer, one of the traditional answers has been this line, and I think it's still okay for black to play this way. You take the knight, and then you play bishop c5, and white now has a choice of squares to go to. You can go to d3, d2, believe it or not, has been played also, and d1. So all these moves have been played. And the idea is that I'm sorry, first of all, the main move is to counterattack right now, here, on the queen. And it turns out that this endgame is very nice for white, or at least it's actually quite nice. It's not just a small, it's a pretty significant advantage. It looks like black can double those pawns, but then what you get is 2 bishops and incredibly weak dark squares here, and white stands much, much better here. In spite of his weak pawns, and black has this horrible, horrible bishop, and it's hard to get that bishop out without weakening. For example, you can't play there without losing the pawn. If you play b5, he's going to decimate your queen side with a move like that. And because that's forced, I guess. Now we start pushing. Now you can't play knight d5 anymore because c4 is going to win material. Oh, I'm sorry. My fault. My fault. You would go here first, stopping black from castling, and then you threaten c4. My apologies. Anyway, you get the basic idea. So the only reason this line works for black, and the only reason I recommend it is because now you can play this move instead of taking the queen. And now you're still attacking the queen. And the queen can go to d3 or d2. Now d2 makes more sense because it doesn't cut off the bishop. Or even d1. But it's usually d3 or d2. let me just show you one of those. Let's say he plays here. Now, one thing black can do now is play this move h6. Now, that looks really weird, but the idea is that if black plays here, white goes here, and he's thinking about taking that and doubling pawns, but also increasing his advantage on knight d5 because black won't be able to play knight takes d5. So what black does is he prepares that. He plays h6, and then if white comes over here to attack this for a third time, that's 1, 2, 3 pieces, black can play slowly here. That's actually a move just to defend that. But actually in this position that might be too good. It's a kind of tricky move because of knight d5 ideas. So actually in this position he almost always plays this move, attacking the bishop. And the bishop only has one move, which is that retreat. And now you can protect that square by playing a move, for example, like king e7 now. Is that right? That doesn't look right to me somehow. My memory is failing me here a little bit. Do you take first? Maybe you take first. Let me just see this position for a second. Yeah, now you can either castle or maybe even play king e7. I think even king e7 is played here sometimes, just to keep the king in the center, and castles. And what white plays for is f4, and when white plays f4, I think you usually take it. Anyway, you get the idea. I think this line is solid and reasonable for black. Then he says, how should I play against it? And also, how should I play against e3 and b3 in the Slav? That's too big a question. We'll get to that. I'll copy the chat and mention that question next week. Okay, and you also say, can we please play a quick game in ICC? Nope, sorry. Okay. So let me quick get on with the questions I was sent. Here's a question about 1d6. And actually, we've had this a couple times. We've had this show is almost 2 years old now, so we've had almost every question, I feel like. It says, maybe you can talk about the following: d4, d6, c4, e5, and takes here. When I looked at my database, black was scoring well. So instead of d takes e, would you recommend something else maybe? And I'll show you in a second what he mentions. So the answer to that is yes. In fact, this is done quite well for black. Why is that exactly? Well, white has made the king stay in the center. The king can't castle, but it's very hard to attack this king. Also, white has no outposts. He has no. If white plays for knight c3, for example, it looks like he's got a nice square there, but black wants to play there anyway, which stops the knight from coming there, and then he can slither the king onto this very handy square. That's a very nice square. Well, it just turns out this pawn structure is very easy for black to play. If white wants to get his pieces out, he can go there, but then he leaves a big hole. That's like the King's Indian, where you leave that big outpost for a piece. But if he plays here, he's blocking off his own piece. And if he fianchettos, then he's kind of running into a pretty strong pawn structure, so that bishop isn't really all that effective. And it turns out, and there's a nice tempo gain here, black can bring his pieces out very smoothly, very, very nicely, just kind of bring the pieces out. And some position like this, and I'm not sure about the exact move order, but some position like this is considered completely equal, and black has done pretty well here. So his question is, what about playing knight f3 to stop the move e5? And indeed, that's probably the most popular move on a grandmaster level. The other thing you can do before we get to that is you can play there, but after e5, don't take it. Just play knight f3 now. That's another possibility. And give me a quick second. I'm going to get a little drink of water here. And I won't go into a lot of theory here, but this position is considered okay. I mean, black usually is fairly happy with this, depending what other openings he likes. Give me 1 second. Okay, that helps. Now black can defend, but then white has a nice space in a typical d-pawn opening. So sometimes black plays very aggressively here, attacks that knight, and the best way for white to try to counterattack is here, and the best way for black to play probably is this move, to kick the knight out. So that goes something like this. And then there's even a line where black decides to play. Actually, a lot of times black won't even attack that yet. He'll attack it this way, so he doesn't weaken his pawns. And then after the knight comes back, maybe just play another pawn move, sort of anticipating stopping that move, and thinking about playing d5 himself. And you can look up this line, but it's considered pretty playable for black, considered pretty reasonable. But white can also play it. It's very interesting for white too. So that's one way the play can go. Now, What about your question about knight f3? And that's what I play. And in fact, just a couple weeks ago, we looked at a line. One thing about, okay, first of all, if you're going to play this as white, you have to be willing, and you're a d4 player, you have to be willing to play a King's Indian defense line. And the difference here is that you no longer can play any of the lines where the knight's back here. So, for example, you can still play a move like bishop g5, and you can play a move like g3. You can play a g3 system. Those are good systems. Or you can play the very, very main line of the King's Indian, which is e4. But then, of course, as you know, we probably know, you have to know a lot of theory, an awful lot of theory in these kinds of positions. What's my point? My point is that if black plays a normal King's Indian, you might have prepared to play something without knight f3. For example, you might have prepared to play something like this, the Samish variation, or something like that. And or maybe even the Averbach variation like this with bishop g5. And you can't play those anymore, or at least not effectively play them when the knight's on f3. So black's move order 1d4 d6 here has actually achieved something. Now the other thing, at least it's limited white's options against the King's Indian defense. So after knight f3, let's talk about that for a bit. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Do I have, this should have worked. Hang on. Oh, let me examine a game really quickly here. Let me put in a game here. EX95. So I pulled up one game with this just for fun, just because it happens to be Kasparov. Whoops. Let me do that one more time. 95. Okay, so a couple weeks ago, I talked about the fact that I had gotten this position a couple of times, and both times I played this move queen d3, kind of an artificial move, and I now can understand why most people don't play it, with the cheap threat of queen b5 check and taking, but also with the idea that now when black plays bishop takes, you have queen takes. So for example, if I had played g3 right away, black usually will take that, and that's a pretty reasonable line for black, because white's pawns really are a little bit weak there. So, so the idea of queen d3 is to play g3 next, which is what I did against Timur Gariv a few weeks ago, or a month ago or so. And but over time I've decided this is not maybe such a great line, and I think you're better off just taking over the center with a move like that, or maybe defending the knight against doubled pawns and then playing a move like e4. And here's an example. Let me just show you this game with e4. I think white's a little better because I think bishop g4 is a little bit early. But a lot of top players have played this as black, so I'm not arguing that it's a terrible line or anything like that. If black plays, there are other ways for black to play here. Black can play with e6 or knight d7 or something, but he just tends to end up with a little bit less space. For example, a position like this is pretty nice because there can even be a g4 coming. If black attacks the center, you just carefully defend it. You don't have to push. And then you can play slowly here, bishop e2, or you can go for it. You can play really aggressively. For example, something like this, and then play for castle's queenside, because you have more space and you might get an attack. Like in other words, if you play something like this and you go here, that can be actually a pretty promising position, but it's risky. Okay, actually after c6 you probably wouldn't do that, but you get the idea. That's the general idea. Now in this game, white played here, attacking the bishop, and then played bishop up, which preserves the idea of maybe playing c3. In other words, you don't play knight c3 yet. You might play it later. But first he just gets a piece out. He's going to castle. And the other thing is that by not playing knight c3, you can now play c4. Well, now this is a standard sort of queen pawn position, isn't it? c4, d4, e4. So that's why white played this way. It's a little unusual approach, but it's kind of, I just want to show you what happens. White develops, and one reason this is of interest is that even though I suspect it was a rapid game or a blitz game, because it was, I'll tell you what game it was later. It's still between some really famous players, and so it's always fun to see famous players play things. Okay, so they're both just getting their pieces out, but black has less space. White's got big space advantage, and that should be worth something. White should definitely be better here. So black tries to challenge the center and break through in the center, and that's not bad. But at this point, something funny happens. He plays the natural move, and it turns out probably white can take that and get some advantage, and then just attack the pawn that remains there. But white tries something else. White tries just castling, and again, this is a pretty good move right now, I think. I don't think, because you have a trick here. You play down here, attacking this twice, and it really can't be defended. And you might say, oh, but black's attacking that, and now he's attacking the queen. But this position is awkward for black. White's going to get his pawn back with a very strong attacking position. He's going to gain time on the queen. Right now he's double attacking that, but he's also threatening knight here, which opens up the rook against the queen. So I think that's what white should have done. It was probably a blitz game, is my guess. But he played that move, which is also not bad, because it opens up another attacker on that square. Now black should take the knight. He really almost has to, but instead black played this move, which looks very plausible and natural, but was actually a blunder because of this move. What's the point of that move? If queen and that's the center pawn that black just lost, and he can't take back because the queen is lost to a pin. And the only reason I put that game in there just for fun is because it's Kasparov versus Anand. In Paris 1992, I got this question right before the show, so I didn't have a chance to look it up, but I'm assuming it was either rapid or more likely a blitz game. But still, they're good enough that their rapid and blitz games are always worth looking at. Okay, what else we got here? No more chats for a while. That's good because I can get to the next question. Yeah, because I can get to the next question. Oh, someone, Alan, who's usually on the show, but since we're 2 hours early today, he isn't on. In fact, hardly anybody's on who usually is on, and I think that's because we're 2 hours earlier than usual. And once again, the reason for that is because ICC has a broadcast coming up in an hour, which is the game of the day for the Sinkfeld Cup in St. Louis. So you might want to watch that if you're an ICC member. You might want to pop onto ICC and watch that, or can watch it. I guess you can watch it here actually on YouTube also. And I'll be doing that broadcast tomorrow, by the way, same time. Great. The Sinkfeld Cup is a top, very, very top level tournament. I think one of the editions was possibly the highest ranked tournament ever. It's got the world champion Magnus Carlsen and pretty much all the other top players in the world playing. So it's fun to follow, and it's going on right now. Okay, let me go back. Okay, now I could show. There's one more reader game. Let me show you. Alan last week or a couple weeks ago mentioned the game Gusev Auerbach as being one of the best games of all time, and let me show you that. It would be which game? Okay. I think you can have fun with this. Everybody can enjoy this. How many people have seen this game before? It's worth kind of popping up here. And I'm not going to give a bunch of notes at all. I'm just going to have you appreciate this game. Let me just show you this. This is fun stuff. I'm sorry, I'm in a big delay here. So if you're asking me questions, I don't have, I'm actually at least 2 minutes behind. It used to be that in this show we were always 30 seconds behind. And this is the second time it's been a big delay, and we'll have to look into that and see why that's happening. It's a lot more comfortable when I'm fairly close to you in time, so I can respond to your questions more quickly. But in any case, let's go ahead with this game. This is good. Oh, and first of all, was something I learned is this is not the famous Yuri Auerbach. This is Yuri Gusev playing white, and who is strong master. And this is E. Auerbach, and I'm not quite sure who he is. It's Auerbach with a U, Auerbach. I'm sure a decent player, but I don't know anything about him historically. It's not the famous Yuri Auerbach, the Grandmaster, who was one of the best players in the world for a while and wrote some famous endgame books. Okay, so it's a Sicilian defense, and I'm not going to annotate this game. I'm just going to show you. A lot of you know what the Sicilian defense is, and it's the dragon variation. This is called the dragon variation. Now, this is a long time ago. This game is from 1946, so the dragon variation theory wasn't as well developed. This is a very conservative way to approach the dragon. These days, people tend to be much more aggressive and play really aggressive moves. But this is the old style, the one that was played against Lasker a bunch, and that's another old style move, and a little hard to describe the point of that move. It stops black from exchanging, and it makes it really easy for white to keep his space advantage. It covers the d5 square again. In other words, at this point, there's always a chance that black might get this move d5 in, but after you play here, that puts another piece against that square. So black really can't have much hope of ever getting d5 in. And so black plays there. Maybe he's thinking about d5 again anyway. And white plays here. Now the problem is on a move like d5, you've got a move like, I think f5 is going to be very strong, just winning this pawn, because the bishop has to retreat. So and f5 is kind of a move anyway, so black plays there, and white plays f5. White just goes ahead and plays f5. Now the way to avoid that, if you wanted to, one way to avoid that would be to play, see if I can get this right. No, I don't think f5 is that big a threat yet, but you could conceivably play that move. I told you I wasn't going to annotate this game. Unfortunately, that allows that, and then you can't take that pawn because of takes, and takes winning a piece. So forget that. I guess the normal move is to simply castle and allow f5, and then go back. And I think you'd see that position in quite a few books probably, or in databases, quite a few games. Okay, but instead of that, black played rook c8 first, and then bishop d7. Black doesn't want to give up the bishops by taking on b3. Okay, so white just launches into an attack here, g4, g5, which actually goes pretty well in this variation. Okay, white keeps attacking, black retreats. That's not a good square for the knight, obviously, to go back to the original square, but he didn't have any choice. White plays there, maybe thinking about pushing. And let me just explain that. If black made a slow move, this might be a very strong move, because if black plays knight takes, I think this is going to probably win a piece or something. See, there's three. There's a rook, a knight, and a queen on that. And there's no way to defend it. And if black had played bishop takes, the same thing happens. You take it first, and then you pin it. And you win that piece with your rook and your bishop. So there's a big... Oh, actually, that's not true, because he has check and gets out. Sorry, mistake. And don't listen to what I'm saying. So what would you really play here? Let me think. Maybe rook takes. How about rook takes? Yeah, there we go. Let's play there. And then bishop up would win this piece, and all the dark squares would fall, and this is a completely won position for white. Okay, let me go back. All that analysis may not have been true, actually. I just want to show you some ideas. Anyway, so black plays there to stop the move f6, but of course that's pretty weakening. And let's just make some more moves here. I don't want to waste the whole time. Yeah, we're getting towards the end of the show, but let me just quickly show you this. I think you'll have fun with this game. And the thing that makes this game unique, so far these are moves that anybody could have made. Now white just sinks into that weakened square. He's giving up a pawn, but of course taking that pawn would be extremely risky. And that would mean taking here, and I think what would happen then, maybe bishop b4 check, or maybe even queen b3. How about queen b3? It's very hard to get out of the discovered check here. White's threatening double check winning the queen, or check here. And the king can't run back, because then you have bishop b5 check. And that's going to win the queen, because after rook c6, you can take it and then play, or I'm sorry, what can you do? Well, anyway, it's a horrible position. Yeah, so you can't take that pawn. So what he does is he goes back and hopes that this is solid enough to protect his king. So white goes real crazy here. It makes a big sacrifice. Now, that's not at all necessary. It may be good, but you could certainly win other ways in this position. But white goes for a very beautiful sequence. And here's that sequence. It's check, and now this move. So it's really kind of cute. So now white's in a whole rook down in this position. And but he has a couple pawns, and he has two bishops, and black's king doesn't even have a move. So white's threatening to just get the rest of his pieces in play, and then maybe even push this pawn, maybe put a rook here, put a queen down here, and just win. But on the other hand, he's a whole rook down. Now notice this rook has no moves, so one of black's worries is going to be trying to get that out. Okay, so black plays a very natural move. If white moves the queen away, black's going to win this pawn, and black's going to be a rook up, and really white won't have enough compensation at all. At least that's the thought. Or he'll have some compensation, but probably not enough. And so here's the point. Here's the position that makes this a classic game. A good question about d3 in the Grand Prix, but let me finish showing this game. And this is the move. Very pretty move. White is already rook down, but plays this move, which gives up the queen. And of course, black has to take it, and now white plays that move. And the point is not that you're threatening checkmate, it's that black has no moves. Not enough moves, anyway. The rook can't move, the king can't legally move. There's no legal king move. And if the queen starts straying too much, like, for example, queen takes pawn, then there's checkmate on f8. So white stays a queen down for quite a while here. If rook takes, that loses immediately to the move bishop c4, and there's actually a forced checkmate now because white's threatening to play bishop takes check, black will be forced to take, and then rook checkmate. And there's no defense to that. If you look at this, there's nothing you can do that black can do about that. So black doesn't do that. Black's a good player and doesn't play rook takes. But the point is that means that this pawn's going to survive for a while, and that's a very strong pawn. So white's real threat here, I'll just tell you, is to play bishop here, and bishop here, and and bishop here, and then play e7 and checkmate. So what is black going to do about that? Well, as it turned out, black tried this move, and which stops bishop c4, by the way. That's important. And which keeps bishop f4 stopped, but also means that f8's covered. So for example, if you had an extra move now, if white played slowly here, like a move like that, black could actually take that pawn because there's no more checkmate over there, and there's no more pin on this diagonal. So that was the idea of rook c8. But white plays that move I was talking about, bishop here. Now if queen takes, you can simply play bishop b3, and now black's still ahead materially, but he still can't move his king or his rook, and white is going to win this game because black's running out of moves and white can just advance here. At least I think that's true. I have to think about that a little bit. Is that right? I think that's true. I think that what happens is black's going to end up running out of moves and white's going to win material by bringing his king all the way over to the queen side and win some pawns and then queen his own pawns. I think that's right. Okay, I won't swear by that. But instead, black plays there, trying to block that bishop off. The idea is to stop that bishop from moving. And there are other moves, and this has been analyzed and attacked it's been analyzed to death on chess.com. If you want to look at chess.com, there have been a lot of talk about this game and what should have really happened. And I think it's all a forced win for white, actually. Okay, so that was black's very clever idea, which is just cut this guy off so that there's none of this discovered check stuff going on. The only problem is black still doesn't have any good moves, doesn't have any moves. So bishop takes, I don't know if that's for sure correct. And then b3, the idea is to get a passed pawn and just walk up the court there. Let me show you how that would go, for example. Well, let's see what was played, first of all. Okay. King up. There's a reason for king up. I'm trying to remember. I think it's because if he starts pushing, oh yeah, if he pushes the pawn right away, black plays queen takes pawn with check. But after king up, he can't really take that. So king up, queen down, rook up. That's just to stop checks. Comes back. Oh, a little repetition there. Okay, now white's attacking these two squares. Black's basically running out of moves is the idea. And now white finally pushes that. And the idea is that if, well, first of all, what happens here? Yeah, if black takes this, then I think rook f7. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a checkmate, right? That's a checkmate. So black's queen is now stuck because it has to actually cover this checkmate too, as well as covering the pawn moving, as well as covering everything else. So basically black's just running out of moves. Black plays there, I think c6, yeah, is a good move. Black plays back, c7, and that's it. That's the end of the game because black has to stop that pawn from becoming a queen, but when he does so, there's a checkmate. It's actually not a checkmate yet because of this, but then I think you would take with the rook, check, and just bring the rook somewhere over here, and then at the very least you're going to win this rook. You're probably going to checkmate, but first of all you're going to be able to win the rook. Here, the way to actually win this would not, the fastest way to win this would not be to win the rook, which would be a rook and a bishop ahead, but probably to try and go for mate instead with that move. But anyway, it doesn't matter because you're clearly winning the game. So anyway, I don't know what you guys thought of that game, but I thought it was a very beautiful, beautiful game. And so did Alan, who suggested that I show it on the show. And so that's it. That's Gusev Averbach, 1946. See if we have any time at all left. I promised to get done on time because we have Game of the Day coming up on ICC, and I want to give everybody time for that. So I think we're going to stop after an hour today. I know we usually go a little further than an hour, but theoretically this game is an hour long. This show is an hour long, so I think this is a really good time to stop. Those of you who didn't get your questions asked on the chat, do not fear, because I will cut and paste this and answer those questions next week. So including the GPEL, THEGPEL, and also UDBAV, Ragu. I'll answer your question too. So thanks everybody, and remember that next week it's going to be at the normal time. We're going back to Tuesday at 6 p.m. ICC time, that's East Coast time. So where I am, for example, in California, it's 3 p.m. Every Tuesday, and I'll be here next week for that. And send me your games. The last thing to mention is send me your games and analysis and questions and anything else on to the email address askimwatson. So that's Ask I Am Watson. AskImWatson at chessclub.com. Okay? So, yeah, I'm finishing Elliot. Elliot Winslow is an extremely strong international master who comes onto the show, and next Tuesday he's going to be here at the normal time. We were 2 hours early. This was supposedly we sent out this. Everybody should have noticed, but actually very few people did. But Elliot, we actually started 2 hours early today because of the game of the day on ICC for the Sinkfield, which is coming up. But next week you'll be here, right? You'll be here at the normal time. That'll be 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time or ICC time on a Tuesday. So thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next week, Elliot. Elliot is one of the stars of the show, so you can look forward to seeing him. And thanks everybody for being here.